The man in the silk robe had a shaved head, a false pigtail, and a Cantonese accent he had spent weeks practicing. He was traveling through the Anhui province of central China in 1848, a region closed to foreigners, where a European without documentation could be detained, deported, or worse. His name was Robert Fortune, and he was a botanist employed by the East India Company. His assignment was to steal the Chinese tea industry. Fortune had already made one successful trip to China as an ornamental plant hunter, gathering specimens for British gardens. This trip was different. The company wanted the tea plant itself, the seeds, the cultivation knowledge, the processing methods, everything China had spent centuries developing and protecting. Fortune traveled for nearly 2 years through some of the most carefully guarded agricultural regions in the world, shipping what he found back to Calcutta in sealed glass cases designed to keep plants alive across ocean voyages. He came back with some 20,000 tea plants and seedlings, a collection of manufacturing equipment, and several experienced Chinese tea processors he had persuaded to accompany him to India. Within a generation, the Indian subcontinent had a tea industry. Within 2 generations, it had surpassed Chinese tea in British consumption. Fortune's mission, one botanist in a fake pigtail, helped accomplish what no amount of diplomatic pressure had managed: breaking China's monopoly on the plant that had dominated global trade for 300 years. But Fortune was a symptom, not the cause. And the real story begins much earlier. It involves a trade arrangement so extraordinary that it remains difficult to fully absorb. The British Empire funded its most beloved national habit with the largest state-sponsored drug trafficking operation in history. Tea is native to southwest China and parts of Southeast Asia. The earliest confirmed records of it as a cultivated beverage date to the Han Dynasty, around 200 BC, and it spread gradually northward and into Chinese court culture over the following centuries. By the Tang Dynasty, in the 8th century AD, tea had become central enough to Chinese civilization that Lu Yu, a poet and scholar raised in a Buddhist monastery, wrote a comprehensive treatise about it. The Cha Jing, the classic of tea, is one of the stranger and more consequential documents in food history. Lu Yu describes not just how to grow and brew tea, but the aesthetic philosophy of drinking it, the quality of water, the ideal temperature, the character of different regional varieties, the proper vessels, the appropriate setting. Tea, in his framing, is not a beverage so much as a discipline, a practice requiring attention and care, capable of producing a quality of mental presence as valuable as the caffeine that caused it. He spent years traveling the tea-producing regions of China before writing a word, tasting water from hundreds of springs, observing how different soils and altitudes affected the leaf. The Cha Jing would be copied, cited, and expanded for the next 12 centuries. It established tea not as a commodity, but as a cultural form, which is exactly why China guarded the knowledge of producing it with the same seriousness other civilizations reserved for military technologies. From China, tea spread along the trade routes that connected the continent. It reached Japan in the 9th century, carried by Buddhist monks who had studied in Tang Dynasty monasteries and brought seeds home. The Japanese didn't merely adopt the practice, they refined it into something more extreme than anything Lu Yu had described. The tea ceremony developed into a ritualized discipline lasting hours, governed by detailed rules of movement, silence, and attention, explicitly designed to produce a temporary removal from ordinary time. The purpose was not stimulation, but the creation of a particular quality of consciousness, with tea as the vehicle. To call the Japanese tea ceremony a method of preparing a drink is roughly as accurate as calling the Sistine Chapel a method of covering a ceiling. Tea reached the Middle East through Central Asian trade routes before it was known in Europe. The first significant European encounter with it came through the Dutch East India Company, which began importing Chinese tea to Amsterdam around 1610. Dutch physicians initially prescribed it as medicine, recommending quantities that suggest they understood it had a powerful physiological effect without quite knowing the mechanism. The fashionable classes took to it. Prices fell as supply increased, and within a generation it had spread from the Netherlands into France, Germany, and across the Channel to England. Tea arrived in England around 1650, sold in London coffee houses at prices that made it initially a luxury for the wealthy and commercially connected. The coffee houses were already serving as the informal trading floors and information exchanges of British commerce, the same institutions that would produce Lloyd's of London and the London Stock Exchange. Tea joined coffee there as the preferred stimulant of the people who ran things. Two events accelerated the spread dramatically. The first was Charles II's marriage in 1662 to Catherine of Braganza, a Portuguese princess who brought tea-drinking habits to the English court as naturally as she brought her native language. The second was the East India Company's acquisition of direct trading access to China, which allowed British merchants to import tea without paying Dutch intermediary margins. The price dropped and demand exploded. By 1700, Britain was importing around 100,000 pounds of tea annually. By 1750, that figure had risen to nearly 3 million pounds. By 1800, it exceeded 23 million pounds per year, enough for every person in the country to drink several cups daily. The social institution that formed around this consumption is worth understanding, because it explains why the supply was so politically non-negotiable. Tea created a twice-daily domestic ritual, a pause organized around a hot drink, small food, and shared time, that embedded itself into British household life with a thoroughness that no commodity since bread had achieved. It crossed class lines in a way coffee never quite managed. The working class drank it heavily sweetened with cheap sugar, the middle class in drawing rooms with biscuits, the aristocracy in specific vessels from specific estates. The drink was different in each case, but the ritual was the same. Britain had built an entire national culture around a plant it could not grow, could not replace, and could only import from a single country 12,000 miles away. The Victorians who most loudly celebrated British civilization as a model for the world were, in their daily domestic ritual, completely dependent on China. China, for its part, had no particular interest in what Britain had to offer in exchange. The Qing dynasty operated on a closed market principle. It accepted silver as payment for exports and bought almost nothing from foreign countries in return. Britain was hemorrhaging silver eastward to pay for tea, and the deficit was becoming structurally unsustainable. The East India Company's leadership, facing the arithmetic of this problem, arrived at a solution that was financially elegant and humanly catastrophic. Bengal, in northeastern India under East India Company control, produced opium. China had a population with an existing familiarity with the drug. It had been used medicinally for centuries, and a long coastline that made smuggling manageable along the southern provinces. The company designed a system of careful deniability. It did not sell opium in China directly. Instead, it auctioned Bengal opium in Calcutta to private trading firms, who moved it to the Chinese coast and sold it to local distribution networks. The company's accounts were clean, and the silver flowed back. By the 1830s, that trade had reversed the balance of payments entirely. China was now running a deficit with Britain, and silver was leaving the country in the same direction as the opium arrived. The consequences inside China were severe and accelerating. Addiction rates rose sharply in the coastal provinces, family economies were destroyed, and the Qing government watched its silver reserves drain away. At its peak, estimates suggest 10 to 12 million Chinese people were addicted to opium, a figure comparable in scale to the most serious addiction crises of the modern era. This was not an accidental side effect of commercial activity. The East India Company's directors understood what they were selling and to whom. The addiction was the mechanism that created predictable demand and consistent revenue. A customer who is addicted is a customer who cannot stop. The Imperial Commissioner Lin Zexu, tasked with ending the trade, wrote to Queen Victoria in 1839, a letter remarkable for its directness and its futility. He argued that Britain would not permit the sale of opium in London and asked why it felt entitled to sell it in China. He noted that Chinese law prescribed death for opium trafficking and asked whether British merchants expected Chinese law to be subordinate to British commercial interests. The letter received no reply from the Queen. Lin Zexu then confiscated and destroyed approximately 1.2 million kilograms of British opium warehoused at Canton, one of the largest drug seizures in history. Britain went to war. The First Opium War, fought between 1839 and 1842, ended with the Treaty of Nanking. China ceded Hong Kong to Britain, opened 5 treaty ports to foreign trade, and paid 21 million silver dollars in reparations, including compensation for the opium Lin Zexu had destroyed. A second war followed in the 1850s, with France joining Britain, ending with further territorial concessions that gave Western powers the access to Chinese markets they had sought for a century. Lin Zexu, the man who had written to Queen Victoria and destroyed the opium, was scapegoated for the military defeat he had not caused, and exiled to a remote province. He spent 3 years there before being recalled and reinstated, and died in 1850 while on his way to suppress another rebellion. His letter to Victoria was never delivered through official channels. It was eventually translated and published in a British newspaper, where it attracted some attention and no action. He is remembered in China today as a national hero. In Britain, he is not much remembered at all. The afternoon tea that British families drank in their parlors in the 1840s and 1850s was funded by opium money. The china cups, the silver spoons, the linen, all of it connected to a trade arrangement that had addicted millions of people to a drug and then fought 2 wars to protect the right to keep selling it. This was not hidden. Parliament debated it, newspapers covered it, and speeches were made. And none of it made any difference to the afternoon tea. The ritual and the drug trade were the same system, running simultaneously, each sustaining the other. Fortune's greatest discovery in China was not botanical, but industrial. British experts had long assumed that green tea and black tea came from different plant varieties. Fortune discovered, by observing the processing directly, that they came from the same plant. The difference was oxidation. Green tea was heated quickly after picking to stop oxidation. Black tea was allowed to oxidize fully before firing. This single piece of knowledge, which Chinese tea producers had kept from foreign observers for generations, changed the economics of establishing tea cultivation in India. Fortune didn't need to transport every variety from China. He needed enough genetic diversity to establish viable plantations, and the knowledge of what to do with the leaf once it grew. He packed his specimens in Wardian cases, sealed glass boxes that maintained humidity, and allowed live plants to survive months-long ocean voyages. He shipped in batches, ensuring against losses at sea. He also recruited several experienced Chinese tea processors, men who understood the withering, rolling, oxidation, and firing steps that transformed raw leaf into finished tea. He persuaded them to travel to the Himalayan foothills of northwestern India, where the British were attempting to establish new plantations. These men spent years teaching methods developed over centuries in Fujian and Zhejiang to workers who had never seen a tea plant processed. The Indian tea industry that grew from this foundation expanded faster than anyone anticipated. The wild Assam tea plants, discovered growing independently in the 1820s, provided additional genetic material suited to the Indian climate, and the combination proved more productive than either source alone. By the 1880s, Darjeeling and Assam teas were competing with Chinese varieties in British markets. By 1900, India had overtaken China as Britain's primary tea supplier. The monopoly China had maintained over the world's most consumed luxury beverage for 3 centuries ended not with a treaty or a war, but with one man traveling as someone he was not. The consequences for China extended beyond the loss of a market. The tea revenues that had flowed into Chinese hands for 3 centuries were redirected to Indian plantations. This contributed to the broader economic hollowing out of the Qing state at exactly the moment it faced internal rebellions, foreign military pressure, and the accumulated humiliations of the Opium War treaties. China would not regain meaningful control of its own tea export trade until well into the 20th century. The tea story in South Asia has a chapter that echoes the Irish famine in compressed form. Ceylon, modern Sri Lanka, was, in the mid-19th century, one of the world's largest coffee producers. The island's colonial economy had been built on coffee plantations worked by Tamil laborers brought from southern India under indentured arrangements. The system was profitable and appeared stable. Nobody was planning for what arrived in 1869. Himalaya vastatrix, coffee leaf rust, spread through Ceylon's coffee plantations with the same thoroughness that Phytophthora infestans had shown in Ireland's potato fields 2 decades earlier. By the late 1870s, the Ceylon coffee industry was dead. Hundreds of plantations stood empty. The British colonial administration, facing economic collapse, made the decision that would define the island for the next century and a half: replant with tea. The roads, the processing facilities, the shipping relationships, and the labor force were all converted from coffee to tea within roughly a decade. Ceylon became a major tea producer, and the name Ceylon tea persists in global markets to this day, despite the country having been independent since 1948 and renamed Sri Lanka since 1972. The colonial brand outlasted the colony. The Tamil workers brought to Ceylon for the coffee industry stayed for the tea industry, and their descendants remained. The up-country Tamils, as this community is known, are a distinct group from the island's indigenous Tamil population, brought specifically to work the plantations under conditions that were, in the early years, barely distinguishable from indentured servitude. After independence in 1948, the Sri Lankan government stripped most of them of citizenship, rendering hundreds of thousands of people stateless on land their families had worked for 3 or 4 generations. The legal situation was partly resolved over subsequent decades, but the community remained politically and economically marginalized well into the 21st century. A fungal infection, a colonial administrative decision, and an indentured labor system generated a social arrangement whose consequences are still being renegotiated. Thomas Lipton was a Glasgow grocer's son who had worked in American retail, absorbed the logic of mass market pricing, and returned to Britain in the 1870s to apply it to food. He bought tea estates in Ceylon, eliminated every intermediary between the plantation and the consumer, and sold tea at prices that put it within working-class reach. His marketing, from the garden to the teapot, was accurate in a way most food advertising is not. Before Lipton, tea was sold loose, by weight, in grades that required knowledge to evaluate. Lipton sold it in uniform packages, blended to a flavor profile that was identical whether you bought it in London or Liverpool. He standardized taste and made it a repeatable product rather than a variable commodity. The transformation was the same one Maxwell House and Folgers had accomplished with coffee in America. A more accessible product that was, in most measurable senses, worse. The tea bag arrived through an accident in 1908. Thomas Sullivan, a New York tea merchant, began sending samples to customers in small silk pouches, intending the pouches to be opened and the tea transferred to a pot. Customers discovered that dipping the pouch directly into hot water was easier and requested the pouches specifically. Sullivan adapted his packaging. The tea bag spread through the British market over the following decades, and by the mid-20th century, it had displaced loose-leaf tea as the dominant format in most Western markets. The product it produced was tea, made from the oxidized dust of broken leaves, rather than the intact whole leaf grades that had defined quality. Brewed for 2 minutes rather than 5. Steeped in paper rather than porcelain. It was functionally the same beverage, and experientially a different one. Lu Yu would have had opinions. The global tea market is worth some $50 billion annually. The geography of how that money distributes follows the same pattern as coffee, sugar, and cocoa. Consuming countries capture the processing, branding, and retail value. Producing countries export raw leaf. India, China, Kenya, and Sri Lanka together account for over 70% of world production. The workers who pick that tea still do so by hand. The quality standard of 2 leaves and a bud cannot be replicated at competitive cost by any machine yet developed. Their wages fall below any reasonable definition of a living income in most producing regions. Consider what happens between the picker and the cup. A tea worker in Assam picks perhaps 20 to 30 kilograms of green leaf in a day, for which she might earn the equivalent of $2 to $3 US. That leaf will be withered, rolled, oxidized, dried, graded, blended, packaged, shipped, imported, warehoused, distributed, and retailed before it reaches a consumer in Britain or America. At each step, value is added and captured, but none of those steps happen in Assam. The tea company's brand, the supermarket's margin, the logistics company's fee, the import duty, all of it accumulates in the consuming country. The picker's $2 are the fixed cost at the bottom of a system that generates $50 billion a year at the top. In Assam, where Fortune's stolen Chinese varieties were first planted at scale, and where the Indian tea industry was established, the plantation system created by the British in the 19th century persists in recognizable form. Workers live in housing provided by the estate, use medical facilities provided by the estate, and send their children to schools provided by the estate. They are not legally bound to the land, but the infrastructure of their lives is so thoroughly embedded in the estate system that leaving it is, for most families, a practical impossibility rather than a genuine choice. Wages in Assam tea gardens have been the subject of labor disputes, government intervention, and international NGO campaigns for decades, with limited durable change. A 2019 report found that malnutrition rates among Assam plantation workers and their children exceeded those of the general rural population in one of India's poorest states, a finding that produced considerable media coverage and no measurable policy response. In Kenya, which became one of the world's largest tea exporters in the decades after independence, smallholder farmers grow most of the crop. They sell it to processing facilities at prices set by purchasing arrangements that leave minimal negotiating power with the farmer. The factory gate price for fresh green leaf, the point at which the farmer's involvement ends, is a small fraction of what the finished product retails for in London or New York. The distance between those two numbers is not simply profit margin. It is the accumulated value of processing, packaging, shipping, branding, and retail, all of which happens in the consuming countries. The structure has been in place, in this basic form, since the East India Company first figured out how to move tea from Chinese hands to British ones. The logistics have changed. The economics have not. Fortune returned to England in 1851 with his notebooks, his pressed specimens, and whatever he made of 2 years spent traveling as someone he was not, through a country being dismantled for his employer's benefit. He wrote a book about the trip. He named it A Journey to the Tea Countries of China. It sold well. He spent the rest of his career as a plant hunter and died, comfortable and respected, in London in 1880. The book is still in print. The knowledge he took, the cultivation methods, the processing techniques, the genetic material, belonged to the people who had developed it. That no legal mechanism existed to prevent him from taking it does not change the nature of what happened. The knowledge was taken without consent and without compensation. The industry built on it did not benefit the people from whom it was taken. The opium that paid for the tea before Fortune made the heist unnecessary. Those consequences are measured in millions of addictions and 2 wars. The unequal treaties that resulted humiliated China for a century and contributed to the political conditions that produced the Communist Revolution of 1949. The connection is not simple or linear, but it is real. The ritual is still with us. Hotel lobbies worldwide sell afternoon tea as a symbol of something gracious. The white tablecloths, the tiered stands, the small sandwiches, the particular quality of pause in the middle of the day. The word used for this, reliably, is civilized. A civilized experience, the civilized choice. That word is doing considerable work in a small space. The thing it describes was built on what it describes, in the way that most things called civilized turn out, on examination, to have been.